Committee meeting from September 7th to order. I'll quickly walk through the agenda, then we'll dive right in. So obviously now, once I go through the agenda, we'll open for public comment. We do have one member on the Zoom, so we'll see if he wants to do public comment. We have the consent agenda, which covers the minutes. I broke out the warrant reports as something separate since we don't actually vote them, but we do sign them, and that's what's going on across the tables here. But just so everybody knows which ones we're signing. Then we have a presentation from Andrew McNichol and Mary Benedetto about the MBTA communities, and that will be a discussion. Andrew's going to do about a 10-minute presentation, give or take, and then we as a committee will engage in some conversation about that. Ultimately, I think the ask is going to be some sort of letter from us and or Dr. Milichewski about that process. We then have Ms. Callanan will join us for the RMHS Student Handbook Review and Approval, which that handbook and all the changes, including a memo, is in the packet. We will then move to the superintendent goals, which we have a draft version for. This is not the final version. We're not voting to approve them or anything, but we do want to engage in discussion if anything people see is missing or they want it better, different, somehow, whatever. That's what this is for. We'll do the final approval at the next meeting, which is the 18th of September. And then we will close the meeting with a brief conversation, relatively, hopefully, on meeting management and presentation that Sarah and Sean asked for at the end of last school year, and now is the time to fit it in. So here we are. So with that said, Ed, you're on the call. Is there any public comment you'd like to make, or are you just joining to watch along?
No, I'm just joining to listen. Okay. Thank you so much. No questions on my end. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Nobody else is in the room, so we have no public comment. So move forward to the consent agenda. And Aaron, this is the second motion we have, right? So.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Seconded by Sean. Any conversation on the consent agenda? Nope. All in favor? All opposed? And it passes 5-0. So now we will quickly move to our friends from the town here, talking to us about MBTA communities. And a presentation will be shared here, and then we'll have a conversation. So there you go.
Alrighty, well, thank you guys for having us tonight. I am Community Development Director Andrew McNichol. I'm joined with Senior Planner Mary Benedetto here. We are here to, as you mentioned, talk to you about the MBTA Communities Law. So I know it's not exactly something that directly impacts you as a board, but it is pretty relevant nonetheless, and we're happy to bring this discussion to you guys and learn from you, and with you along the way. So I'll go ahead and jump right in. Maybe. There we go. So what is MBTA communities? It's a law that was passed at the state level in 2021, and what it mandates is that 177 municipalities in the Boston metro region confirm that they have a district of reasonable size, that they call it, where multifamily housing is zoned for by right at a specified density, which is 15 units per acre across the zone. And the parameters of such are determined by each municipality's characteristics, what type of MBTA service they might have, developable land area that they have, their current housing stock. So there's a few different metrics at play there to determine each municipality's requirements. You'll notice, they're based on MBTA service, right? Rapid transit community is one designation, and they have a faster deadline than, let's say, the town of Reading has, and which is a commuter rail community, and past that is adjacent communities whose deadline is even further. So everybody's requirements are a little bit different, but I'm sure what's important to you guys and many in the community is what that means for Reading. So let's talk about that. Reading is classified as a commuter rail community, which means that at least half of our zoning district must be where that multifamily is allowed by right, must be located within a half mile of our train depot that's at the heart of our downtown. our deadline for compliance is by the calendar year 2024, so we must reach compliance by that December. And we have to prove through a tool and metrics system that we have a by right zone capacity for a set number of units where that multifamily is achieved at 15 units per acre across the zone, which for Reading comes to 43 total acres that we have to find zoning for. What's important from that takeaway is that we currently do not have any zoning districts that meet the requirements, so we must undergo zoning amendments, and that's really why we're here today and why we're undergoing this process with the community at large. So to take a step back, what is zoning? Zoning is a rule book for future development in the municipality. It really helps guide what's to come in the town and how we properly plan for it. And again, it really impacts new development, not what's existing. So that's the key takeaway there for zoning. And it's really the community's guidebook as to what's important to them and how they can achieve their vision. So certain elements like uses allowed, dimensional controls around those uses, height, parking, et cetera, are set in zoning, and we take that going forward with any potential application that comes to us. By right zoning, which is required under this law for multifamily housing, means that a proposed project can move through the normal approval process that does not have any discretionary approvals to them. Items like a special permit, variance, waivers, they are discretionary to the planning board, zoning board, or whoever is overseeing that application. By right is a bit of a simpler process. But again, it's important here in this context that by right does not mean there's no review. It can still be subject to something like a site plan review, which is regulated by the planning board and undergoes a public hearing process, findings and conditions tied to such. The result of our process here is that we will be proposing zoning changes and this April, and we'll get to the schedule later, but that's really the ultimate end goal, is to amend our zoning for compliance. This slide here is an example of multifamily housing, and under zoning, multifamily housing is classified as at least 3 units or more on a lot. And what you see here is the different types of multifamily housing that currently exist in Reading and are located within the half mile from the depot already. So we know a lot of times when people think multifamily, their mind immediately may jump to the mid-rise apartment style complex. But again, it's 3 units or more. And what that allows Reading and other municipalities to do is find different ways to achieve compliance with the law based on what's important to us and what's the current need. So zoning can be crafted in many different ways to incentivize certain developments or restrict certain developments, and that's part of the process that we're trying to understand of what this community would like to see and how we can then write that into zoning at an appropriate level. So why do we intend to comply with this law? First and foremost, it is state law. The town shall be compliant with state law. Communities that fail to comply with the law will not be eligible for certain grant fundings that are regularly used by not just us in planning, but many other departments as well. You can lose not just access to those grant funds, but you might also see an impact to your housing authority budget, which is one of your most important partners as a community for housing. So that's a detriment. And if we also don't comply with the law, what's mostly important sometimes on our end is that we could face litigation as the town, both from the state or from civic rights groups advocating for fair housing law. So that's kind of the front and foremost reason to comply. The background reasoning to comply is that many communities in the Boston Metro and across the state, and even across the nation, have to share in the opportunity to create more diverse housing stock. If you haven't looked for a house or an apartment in a while, you might not have noticed that some of the costs are quite astronomical today. So fair market rents are up over 50% in the region in the last 5 years. In Reading alone, it's up over 30%. Home prices have increased far and above median salaries, especially here in Reading, indicating that future home ownership in Reading and in many others will be a challenge for the average person or family looking to begin their housing journey. And some numbers to kind of reiterate that. So In 2016, the median home price was just over $500,000. By 2020, that had jumped to over $650,000, and by 2022, that number has skyrocketed to over $800,000. It's an increase of over 20% since the year 2020. Condos have had a similar impact as well as rents that I had mentioned. In Reading, the median household income is $133,000. To afford the median price home, you have to earn over $235,000. So that's a gap of over $100,000 from the median income needed. So there's a lot of underlying metrics here at play of why this housing shortage is very important to address in the current state. So this is our timeline for the process. You'll see that it ends in January 2024, and that's because we've set an aggressive timeline to draft zoning, open the hearings, and close them so that we can achieve new zoning at April town meeting in 2024. We want to try to bring it to April town meeting because, one, if approved at April, it would give us plenty of time to get AG approval and work through the process for compliance. If we aren't able to achieve it at April town meeting, it gives us a second shot in November before we have to comply by the end of 2024. So it's an aggressive timeline, but we feel confident we can achieve it. So currently we are tailing off the end of phase 1 here. The engagement phase in phase 1 consisted of a survey, attending many community events to table and spread the word about this initiative. We went to many boards and committees like yourselves to share the word and get their input and guidance as well. And we've been doing some preliminary research in the background as well to help guide any future zoning that may come. So we're starting to enter phase 2. Our engagement for phase 2 is going to consist of a series of forums and workshops to help educate the community and work with them on this zoning language as we continue more and more research to work with partners like you guys, any other housing availability, and more. So finalizing will likely and hopefully be April 2024 town meeting. So I had mentioned in this phase 1 of public engagement that we had administered a survey. It was open all summer long, and we had over 750 responses to it. Our survey was designed to not just help us craft future zoning that the community would like to see based on that feedback, but also to find out what concerns many community residents may have with multifamily housing when they think of it. One of the most top written in concerns is school impact, both enrollment numbers, classroom specifically, grade specifically. School has continued to be a write-in comment as a concern, so that's one of the reasons why we're here with you today, to best understand how we can work with you guys to address that concern, mitigate those impact concerns if at all. So what the data is going to look like to help support that. We've taken a look at the maps here for your school districts. So the blue outline here on these maps is our half mile radius from the depot. And you can see that it ends up spanning actually multiple school districts, both in elementary and middle school. Middle school a little bit less so, but it does. So that might help support and guide us to help not just direct impact to one school district alone if we can help it. So again, would love to work with you more on this to figure this aspect out of it, but we've taken a look at some preliminary numbers from the census and local findings. We've seen that school enrollment numbers have decreased by around 10% in the last 5-ish years. Looking at the age composition and projection, we know we're starting to skew a bit older in the community, but the younger generations are still upcoming, and we would expect that that could increase at any time based on the projections. So our eventual ask, which I think you had mentioned, is for a written statement from school committee or perhaps the superintendent that you're aware of this initiative, you're confident that we can manage it and any growth that arises from it. So we've been trying to understand what information may help guide us along in this process working with you guys. So we'd love to better understand what projection data does the school system use? Is it census alone? We know there's the MAPC study. Do you partner with them? Are there other places that we haven't looked at that may help us find some data and understand where we're going with it? we want to look at historic enrollment trends, both totally per grade and by school, and what those peak enrollment numbers look like. And from our standpoint, when we look at crafting zoning like this, it's both when zoning is allowed to development, it's not linear. It's a lot of ups and downs, both with the market, not just housing, but commercial and many other sectors. So there's no straight arrow that when we allow zoning, that it's going to be this linear path of growth and all of these units are going to come online at the same time. There's also no requirement for us to build these units by X date. It's really just that the zoning allows for it and is there. And we'd love to be able to compare our permitting data with you guys, that if we've developed X number of multifamily housing units over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, what does that look like when compared to your enrollment numbers? And based on our multifamily growth, did we see spikes in enrollment from there? And that might help guide us to better understanding what we might see from this process when zoning is allowed. So again, different types of multifamily housing, different types of zoning. So that is really the close of our presentation. I guess I can close with, we have some upcoming forum dates. Tuesday, September 19th is our first forum. We'd love to have you guys there if you're available, or please spread the word to friends, families, neighbors. We just want to help bring the community as much as possible along with us in this journey. That way we can reach compliance with as much input and support as possible. So I'm happy to open it up to questions and take it from there.
Okay, Aaron's quick. There we go.
So I caught some of your numbers. So we're talking about an area of 43 acres, you said, and the goal is 15, on average, 15 units an acre.
Across, so you can use one district or you can use many, but regardless, each district has to achieve that 15 units per acre requirement if you use multiple.
So how far are we off?
So that's a tough question. Each district we have, and we went through early technical assistance with a consultant, RKG. They looked at our zoning districts within the half mile, both the 40R, the Business A, and the A40 zoning district, all of which allow multifamily by right currently. None of them achieved either the unit capacity count or the density needed for compliance. And it's not something that you can just like add them together, right? Because the zone itself has to achieve it. So when we looked at it, the number one reason why we didn't really comply currently is that lot size requirements are higher. Reading's a very old community. A lot of our lots are very undersized compared to current regulations. And when you plug that into the tool, those lots are immediately nixed as a 0 unit capacity because they don't currently allow multifamily or housing development by right because they don't achieve the minimum standards. So it's not a clear answer exactly what our current districts have. I have the numbers, 40R is 800 units at 8 units per acre or close there too. But if zoning were to change, those numbers are really going to change quite drastically. Based on zoning, I would say it's unlikely that you find a exactly 43 acre area that achieves the exact unit capacity and density needed. So that's why our survey and what we're working towards now is really understanding what the form of multifamily housing the community would like to see and where that's appropriate based on that form. And we can kind of make the numbers work from there on the tool compliance and figure out what's appropriate and needed, is our hope.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
So the goal is by the end of 2024 that we have changed the zoning such that this could be built, developed?
Correct, that the zoning is in place. We will not control the pace of development.
Okay. I'm struggling to understand where we're going to fit. It's already quite dense
It would
down there.
be, I mean, presumably it would be homeowners selling their homes and they being redeveloped as multifamily properties, is that?
Zoning capacity only, so nothing at all gets built from this, right? You could hypothetically, in the future, as an individual property owner,
Right.
decide to use the zoning changes to develop, right? Maybe you're someone who wants to add a second or a third unit and, you know, we have a little income property. That's an outcome that could happen from the zoning changes, but no construction actually is an outcome of this directly. The zoning changes, right, that if you change zoning, people will decide to develop. But it's not, as Andrew was saying, like, when you make zoning changes, it's not a linear line directly into a lot of construction happening.
Thank you for clarifying.
The key, I think, is the by right statement, right? They don't have to go to the zoning board of appeals for something that they want to do to build it into a multifamily, a four-family, whatever else like that. It's, as long as you meet other requirements, maybe like you have a small site plan review, whatever the case might be, but as long as you meet those requirements, you don't have to go through months and months of zoning board of appeals related conversations. It's
Correct.
much more straightforward of a process.
Yep.
Carla?
I have so many questions.
Ask away.
Hold on, before you do that, just from a time management perspective, I want us to finish this part of the meeting at about 7:40, so we have about 18 minutes.
Okay, I'll be done in 12. So,
Be conscious of your fellow committee members, Carla.
so I opened the survey multiple times and never got past the first question because I felt like I was locked into an answer and didn't have an option to not agree with any of it. So just to say that, so I haven't even commented on it. I guess my suggestion moving forward, because I know I have so many questions, and I'm sure once people start hearing about it, they're going to have so many questions, is how does it impact me as a homeowner? How does it impact someone, everybody as homeowners, right? Is the person next door who sells their house, or wants to renovate their house, are they going to be limited in what they are able to do, or what's going to go up next door to them? So just things like that, how will it impact us? And I'm going to push back a little bit on the comment of where, you know, the construction's not going to start. The construction's going to be like a freight train once those zoning regulations go in, and we will not be able to stop it in this town because the floodgates are going to be open, right? So I'm going to kind of go back to have, and I think that you need to give voices to people in this town to oppose this. Bill Ricca is opposing it. You have Rockport, Groton, Holden. They're working with local attorneys to go after the state to stop this. So I would like to see that as an option for Reading. Once I understand it, I want to be able to have that option. Right? So just saying, like, you can't, it sounds like a done deal to me. And I also, one of the things that stuck out to me in the presentation is one of the reasons why we should do it is because there's going to be, you know, potential lawsuits. I'm going to, from a school committee perspective, I'm going to say, if we're opening the floodgates and all of a sudden we're having our enrollment shoots up, our schools, we're building a new school to try and alleviate the pressure on the other schools. Space requirement-wise, we're, like every other district in the Commonwealth, are on the hairy edge. So where we may be warding off people suing us from the building side, the town side, think about the special ed costs when we're not able to take care of programmatic needs, special ed requirements. Think about those lawsuits that are going to be coming in on the town side. So that piece of it makes me really concerned about it as well. Are these requirements only within that zone?
So we have to fit at least 50% of our 43 acres in the zone and 50% of the unit capacity in that half-mile zone. We could achieve it elsewhere. However, many other zoning districts are very built out and don't meet minimum size requirements, so it would be a difficult approach to look at many multiple areas across the town without changing, I guess, single-family neighborhood.
So, can I continue with that?
Yep.
So, this whole model is based upon those people in those areas which are within half a mile to an MBTA stop, that they're going to all jump on the MBTA, right? I mean, right, that's the goal.
That's the long-term vision, yep.
So we have a rail system that is subpar. Tonight on the news, 10 minutes before I came here, they talked about the Orange Line having, last year when they made renovations to the Orange Line, that the Orange Line is now slower than it was prior to renovations. Like, this is a disaster waiting to happen, in my mind.
So to many of your points, there's a long-term vision that needs to be planned for and prepared for. You know, I know the MBTA is not in its best state, but that's a partner we're trying to work with and understand what their long-term vision, short, medium, and long-term vision is for their ridership, and making sure that they have the capacity to achieve what this vision sets. So I think they're very well aware of this and working towards it and striving towards it. And it's just, to your point, a difficult challenge with the MBTA.
But they need to be ready in a year.
So, well, no, the zoning has to be ready, doesn't mean they have to be
Exactly.
ready.
But
So
if
let me hold on a second, because the whole point of this meeting is school-related stuff, right? So I want to bring it back to the schools. We have, as regular members of the community, we can attend all these forums and say a lot of the other stuff that we have concerns about, and I think many of us have those concerns. But if we bring it back to the schools, that's what we want to talk about today. What is the impact on the schools? What is the thought process around how we're measuring or observing drops of enrollment? What does that mean? If the area is going, Andrew, if you can flip back to the map for the schools in particular, if that area in the circle starts getting more housing, what does it mean to us, right? That's what we need to talk about today, as opposed to the whole grand scheme, for lack of a better way to say it. And so I'm going to ask this question. And we talked about it briefly in email, right? And so it's a bit of a touchy question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because otherwise I don't feel like we'd be informed. Do we have any data, or can we get data, that demonstrates approximate numbers or average numbers or something else along those lines of types of students that are in multifamily housing, for lack of a better way to say it? We have, while our numbers have dropped due to COVID, but also due to other reasons, our needs have increased over the last few years.
Could you
So-
explain that a little bit to us?
So, if DESE would qualify them as high needs students in particular, whether it's English as a second language or multi-language learners, whether it's special education students, whether it's students of color, or anything else along those lines, low income, those are the four categories of what DESE would term as high needs learners. We've seen an increase in particular in the last couple of years in multi-language learners. We haven't seen the same in special education, to my knowledge. We've made a purposeful decision to increase, in students of color on purpose as well. But part of understanding, and I'm trying to frame this the right way, but I'm sure I'm messing it up. It's not just the numbers that matter, is my key point, right? It's the needs that matter. And if there is, if we look at Chelsea, we look at Boston, we look at Lynn, we look at other places with high density populations, what are we seeing in those, what are those school districts seeing in those high density population areas from a needs perspective? Because my other concern about this is and to my knowledge, and I'd love to hear otherwise, Andrew, this is somewhat of an unfunded mandate. It's do it and then deal with the results. And so that's what I'm a little worried about, right? So with Chapter 70, we do get some extra money based upon certain need levels of some of our students, but that doesn't move the needle for us because where we are from a Chapter 70 perspective. So I'd love to understand more of that data if possible. And I know it's easier said than done. It may not even be possible.
Yeah, to my knowledge, there's metrics out there for children per unit, and whether that's by housing type, I can find out. I just know per unit. The challenge here is that we don't know what development. We'll craft the zoning as much as we can to be appropriate, but what we're not going to know is it a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4 or 5, whatever it may be. So that's a challenge, both just from the family perspective of how much it can accommodate, but I am more than willing and happy to look into some of these questions and reach out to these communities to see how we can partner and find out what they've seen.
I mean, I don't know if is that thought process wise, I think that's really more of our concern than the enrollment numbers. To answer some of your questions from before, we had a study that was done right before we filed for the Killam stuff, the McKibben study. I think you
Yep.
have that available, right? It doesn't show a huge increase over the next 10 years. So as if everything stays the way it is now, you know, I don't think we have a worry from that perspective. But to Carla's point, as we build Killam, we do have 4 of our elementary schools with 2, you know, external classrooms in each case. And so we want to get rid of, well, not get rid of that, but we want to bring those kids back into schools. So there's some redistricting that's already happening. So there's some, Killam in particular is probably going to go and become a very large school. So how do we balance that with the needs? It's not just the raw numbers. A lot of people come back to the raw numbers. The raw numbers basically are lying versus the needs that the students, that we're seeing our students have.
Yeah. I think a lot of our long-term goals or short-term goals overlap both for access, accessibility, health, transportation. So we're more than happy to partner with you on a number of those initiatives in whatever fashion we can going forward. Zoning and housing is just one piece of it, and we do much more than that in planning and in town hall. So again, it all just comes back to a larger discussion of how the town itself is preparing for this, and we're just one facet of that.
Sean, you were going to ask a question?
Yeah, I mean, so first, I agree with you, Tom. The McKibben forecast that we did didn't show a huge increase, but I will say it was, most of the sort of more simplistic forecast models out there show us as a continued decline because they basically rely on the rate over the last 5 years. And in the McKibben forecast, we looked, it was more sophisticated, looked at things like an assumption about an increased rate of housing turnover because of the aging population, new housing starts because of the units that were coming online that haven't been reflected in the census data yet and that sort of thing. So, while it may not be a huge increase on an absolute basis, it's larger than like what the MSBA proposed, for instance, when we first got a forecast from them when we were looking at the Killam school. So I think that's an important factor. The second thing was really more of a question. What you said during the presentation was what you're looking for from us is essentially a statement that the schools can handle the impact of this. What are the implications of us saying, we're actually quite concerned about the school's capacity to handle the implications of this? Is it impossible for us to be compliant if we have that concern? Like, what does that look like?
So that's not exactly the statement that I'm looking for. It's more that you're aware of this initiative and partnering with us to address these concerns and mitigations. I'm not tied to any one approach. I am more than willing to let the data speak for itself and move from there on what it says. So that's really the statement that I'd be asking for and looking for, that you're aware, you're partnering with us, and we're doing our best to achieve our long-term vision here.
I think he and I have discussed that the projecting forward is difficult for a number of reasons, right? Because it is zoning and not construction, because we don't really, within the law, you can't say whether it's going to be a studio or a 4-bedroom apartment, right? So we have no idea what could actually be constructed from that zoning. It's zoning for units only, no specificity of bedrooms. What we can say with certainty is what has happened over the last decade, right? We can say that we have permitted 900 multifamily units, and we can say what has happened with enrollments in the schools, right? So if we're not comfortable looking forward and making assumptions because of the very opaque nature of zoning and of its relations potentially to enrollments, I think at that point, then we would say, well, then let's just say what's happened over the last decade, because we have those numbers.
And to the point of partnering, we can take those numbers and our student enrollment information and cross-correlate that
Yep.
and see what kind of student needs we're seeing against some of those housing starts, for lack of a better way to say it, whether it's a single-family house that was up by Wood End or, one of the, the Met right by, the train station there, and see what we're seeing. And then anonymize it, abstract it out a little bit, and see what that means for us. Okay, Carla?
I also want us to keep in mind that, and I can't remember if it was a GNAP study or this one more recent, about our existing schools being 30 to 50% too small. Right, so enrollment is a huge concern for us.
Yeah, that's the MSBA-related required or recommended size for number of students, and that was the GNAP information, so.
So if our schools are already too small, this is hard for us to take in.
And so, sorry, just so I can better understand, even with the decrease in enrollment, the schools are too small.
30 to 50%.
They're too small relative to the MSBA expectations for a new building. They're not necessarily small comparatively across the state or anything, I mean, they are, but they're not that much smaller comparatively across the state. But relative to what the MSBA would say a new building needs to look like to have the appropriate footprint for the, what special needs programs and so forth look like today, our schools on average are somewhere between 30 and 50% smaller than what a new building would look like.
So just to elaborate, when we talk about student needs, because people do tend to harp on the enrollment numbers, but here's what happens is we have classrooms that are learning centers, that are reading support centers, that are specialized special ed programming classrooms within the building because we're able to keep more students in district. But then there are laws around how many kids can be in those spaces at the same time and the age span of those kids. So we might have fewer third grade classrooms in the district, but we are using spaces differently to meet the needs of our population.
Gotcha.
So when we talk about why, even though enrollment overall has gone down, we're still having crowded schools, it's because of those unique spaces that we need in each of our school buildings to meet the growing needs of the population in town. The other thing I think, this is such a tricky point for us as a school committee because we are in the midst of planning a brand-new school building to address space needs. So it's hard to think about throwing a whole other wrench. We have all this data on current space needs and current numbers. But to think about, that we might put all this time and build this perfect school that meets all these needs, and then all of a sudden an influx of housing, and now our schools are crowded again. So it's hard to just sort of as a school committee member, it's hard to wrap my head around that. And then the other piece, I'm a realtor, so talking about housing, it really does depend on what kind of housing you're talking about, because if you're talking about one-bedroom apartments, you're very unlikely to have a number of school-age children. But if you're talking about a 3 or 4 family home, you might finally have built something affordable for a family that wants to get into the Reading school system. So, the type of housing really does matter greatly. And I know that you don't know what it's going to be. We're talking about zoning, but there's a huge unpredictability factor here that makes me very uneasy.
I don't know that I have an answer for you tonight, but
I think that this has been just super helpful, understanding this. I was reading through our survey comments, and there were comments about overcrowding in classrooms and other things, and he and I are just
Doesn't make
is there?
sense, right?
We don't have a lot of context for this, and so we're getting feedback on it, and so it's been great to come here and speak with you and to kind of learn a little bit more about some of the issues on your end to understand how they interact with what we will be doing this fall.
I'll just put the last point here, I think, looking at my own timeline, is those are the lines as they are now, they're going to move.
okay.
Because we've already committed that they're going to move as part of Killam being built. Some of the Birch Meadow, some of the Barrows, some of the Joshua Eaton, most likely is going to be in that lighter blue from an elementary level at some point in time. What this impacts, though, that also then, those are the 3 schools that theoretically we're alleviating by Killam, to Aaron's point, and now we're exacerbating it. So the more we can think about other places around, you said 50% has to be in that region. So the more we can think about other places around Reading that the other 50% can be, would be great, right? Just think about school leveling. This is just one person's thought. I don't even know if it's realistic. But just something to think about. And at one point, there was talk about adding a second train station over, behind the DPW building or something like that. So I don't know if that's is part of this conversation or not, does that extend the half-mile radius? And now it's like 2 half-mile radiuses that overlap into like a figure 8, or, what are we talking about if that becomes the case?
Yeah, I think, so that's part of where our forums will help guide us. So the survey is just one facet of it, and it does, I don't want to say anything too fast as we're still looking at the results and where it is, but it's pointing towards the needs of having it around the depot and transit and amenities. And so Walker's Brook could be a long-term vision for that as well. I think that's a visioning process we'd love to undertake one day soon and understand what the community would like to see at areas like Walker's Brook, areas like downtown again, what else is there out there. But for this specific reasoning, it would be a challenge to look elsewhere for housing alone, multifamily housing, right? So commercial corridors might want to keep commercial aspects to them. Walker's Brook similar, so mixed use and those requirements can be an aspect of this, but at the end of the day, this is a multifamily housing law.
Can you send us the future school district maps? The future,
We don't have them yet.
okay.
We can partner with you. as
I'm
we
sure
come
we'll
to
hear
that
about
point.
it. Yep. Could you send
a
us
fair
that
statement, Tom?
study you had mentioned?
We can send you, yeah, we can certainly send you the enrollment forecast. The earliest we'd be able to even start to think about what a redistricting would look like would be after we know what the final footprint of the new building's going to be, which is,
Gotcha.
a year away at least, right?
At least
So,
a year away, yeah.
yeah, so I will say, I do think it actually works to our favor that the zone covers multiple elementary districts, because to the extent that we need to think about sort of reserving excess capacity, it's better to be able to spread a little bit of capacity across 4 schools than
Yes.
holding 60 empty seats in one, in
Yes.
one building.
Yes. Andrew, Mary, thank you. Thank you for coming and sharing us the information. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Please reach out to us at any time. We are always available to discuss this and many other initiatives across town.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving right along, Ms. Callanan, your turn. Yeah, come on up over there. You can take Chuck's seat or whatever.
And his name, playing the role of Chuck Robinson.
Playing the role of Chuck Robinson. We're moving on to the RMHS Student Handbook Review and Approval.
You ready?
Start with you.
Okay.
Ready when you are.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. First, I just want to open by saying thank you to the Reading community for the warm welcome in my new role this year. I've felt incredibly supported by the superintendent and the district staff and the school committee. My staff is amazing, especially getting through this first week that's unseasonably hot. And the parents and students are just super fun. So I just want to say thank you. Without further ado, I did send a memo that I think everybody received in their packets that sort of summarizes the changes to the handbook. I was able to meet with my school council on August 30th, and we reviewed these and we voted on these as the changes to the document. And then in addition, I sent a document that should track changes within the handbook itself. And I did that because I thought it would be the easiest way to see where the changes are. And then once approved, I'll go in and correct each one in the document itself. I think that a lot of them are very self-explanatory, changing years, changing names, cleaning up grammar, cleaning up wording, reference to things like the foreign language department changing to world language, library changing to library media center, removing dated references to COVID. Something that was an add that the school council, we felt strongly about adding was under the section that is academic honors speakers of graduation, is adding a slash in between there, kind of separate the two. I know it seems silly, but it was slightly confusing. And then adding the quoted 2 sentences after that just states that traditionally the valedictorian and salutatorian do speak at graduation. And we put the caveat of traditionally because if a student does not feel comfortable speaking, of course, they do not have to do that. And then in the event of a tie of either the valedictorian or salutatorian, not with each other, but if there are 2 salutatorians or 2 valedictorians, that the person that is chosen, it would be determined out to the 100th percentage, which I, in my previous school, actually had this happen twice, where we had 2 salutatorians, and this was a policy in that handbook. And it just helps to clean things up, and if there's 2 salutatorians or valedictorians, great, you know, they worked really hard and they deserve that honor. The National Honor Society has new advisors at the high school. Miss Holly Beth Murphy left, and we have Miss Betty Murphy and Tanya McSorley have taken over. They're in the process of updating the requirements for National Honor Society, one of which is looking at the amount of service hours that students are required to serve. That is not finished yet, so the school council agreed to say when that is done, that policy will then supersede what is in the handbook. And so it's to the students' benefits to hopefully make it easier for students to get into National Honor Society if they meet the qualifications, and having different hours count, additional hours count for service hours. Because previously it was 70 hours, so 40 hours in their junior year, 30 hours in their senior year, which is a lot, especially for our busy students. And so they're just looking at tweaking that a little bit. Let's see. The Mary Juliana, the head of our health services department, asked me to add in that parents may opt out of screenings that are by the health office if they choose to, by sending written notice to the school nurse. She said this was just a legal cleanup, that's something that she thought needed to be included. And let's see. The last bullet on the memo on the front page is changing, cleaning up our senior final exam exemption policy. And so in the school council, or in the handbook, previously it had said through the end of 3rd quarter, students had to have a B average. And so we actually have extended that students have to have a cumulative B average over the course of their time in a class through the end of 4th quarter to be exempt from the final exam. And seniors, it's only for seniors, and their 4th quarter is shorter, and we do want to make sure that they stay very focused until the end, and that is a big motivation. So that was something that the school council agreed that, and the students are also on the school council, but they agreed that it was a good policy as well. And then the multiple pages after was language that our attorneys asked all levels to include, but it was tweaked for elementary, middle, and high school. That is added into the handbook in the appropriate spots and replacing old language that was a duplicate. That is all I have, unless, obviously, if anybody has any questions.
Looking around. Let's start with a motion, then we can ask questions or anything else, so.
Motion to approve the 2023-24 Reading Memorial High School handbook.
Second?
Seconded by Carla. Okay, any feedback or thoughts from anybody? Erin?
So first off, thank you, because I know this was like quick work on this one. So I appreciate that you were able to bring together the school council and get their input and make as many changes as you did make. I'm wondering, so I know there are still a few things in here that are not necessarily reflective of current practice or current recognition. What is the plan for some of those type issues? Will it wait until you're reviewing this again in the spring, or is this something that can be talked about with your school council throughout the year?
So I think that, that's a great question, that this is a very lengthy document, and so we have agreed already as a school council to take it in segments and move through it each month to update it, so by June, it will already be ready for approval, which is, would be my preference, that is done by the end of the school year, because once the summer comes, it's very hard to gather people together, and, especially for our students, it's cruel and unusual punishment to bring them in the summer. And so that would be my plan, is to take it in pieces each meeting after we can complete the school improvement plan, which will be in our next meeting, to bring to the school committee. So that it's not just such an arduous task in one meeting at the end of this school year.
Great, that sounds like a great goal.
Okay. So just so the rest of the committee knows what you and I talked about earlier
Yes.
today, I'll just share some of that as well. So there are places in the document right now that, because of legal's updates, it says Reading High School. We're Reading Memorial High School, so we'll make that small update. To be consistent with the terminology from a gender perspective that we use in all of our other policies, instead of his, her, I suggested their as a replacement, so that's consistent with all the policy work that we've been doing. In the place in section 9 where legal added new Bs and Cs, it messed up all the headings. So the old B now becomes D, the old C now becomes E, et cetera. So some of that's just minor cleanup. And there's some other minor things to go through that, Jess, you can make a decision about as you go through it,
Yeah, of
whether
course.
it's now
Yeah.
or whether it's later, in terms of language and how it reads and whatnot. So just as an example, I had it up on the page here. If you look at this code of conduct, the second bullet here that's highlighted yellow on the screen, it says, establish accountability for students who fail to act as safe, respectful, a safe, inclusive, and engaging learning environment. It just reads weird. You have safe and then a safe, and I think I know what the intent is, but the way it's written is just kind of odd. And I think that might have come from legal, so I'm sure we can get it cleaned up. I've had the
Yes.
same issues at times.
It did, I did not edit the
Yeah.
pieces from legal, yeah.
Yeah, so we can get those just minor, things to clean up so it's clearer what it's trying to
Will
say,
do.
so.
Yep.
But otherwise, I echo all of Aaron's thoughts, going through it. You clearly went through line upon line, precept upon precept. I would say the other thing I said in the email was I still, and I hope when you guys go through it this year, we can get the policies directly out of there, because some of the changes you made actually were to our policies, which makes them out of alignment with the policies.
Agreed.
Or they might be actually in alignment now because we've already fixed the policies, but you're catching up to the policies. So we'll see, but
I did read both documents, the new handbook and our current one. I do not believe there's anything that's directly in conflict, but there is some redundancy.
yeah. So we'll get those taken care of. But I think overall, I just want to, again, thank you and the school council. I think they came together like before school or
They
the
did,
second day of
on
school or
August
something like
30th.
that.
They're rock stars, yes.
For getting to this point, and we'll continue to make progress to make it better, so I appreciate it. Any other comments? Okay, votes on the table. All in favor? All opposed? And it passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good one.
Get out of the hot school now, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so we will move on to Dr. Milczewski's goals. So you want to introduce?
Great, sounds good. So in the packet, you should have a draft set of goals. I'm just going to provide, kind of walk through them one at a time and just bring a couple of things to your attention. The first thing I'd like to just thank Tom and Aaron as chair and vice chair have helped me kind of work through this over the past couple of weeks, a few different iterations. So just want the committee to be aware that I had some support and thought partnership and collaboration already on kind of getting to this point too. So goal one, we thought it was important as I enter into my, both at this point and to be completing a third and fourth year in the district, that I am measured and held accountable on some of our key student outcomes. So some of the ones you'll see identified in here are first, by the end of the 2023-2024 school year, achieving all targets that are set out by DESE, both in terms of growth and achievement, both overall and by student demographic groups. The reason why that's 2023 and also not 24-25 is by the time of the evaluation, we won't have 24-25 data at that point. I'll share those. I mean, DESE shares, they set those targets. You'll see them hopefully when the accountability data comes out this year. They're lofty, but I think achievable targets. I don't know many districts who have consistently hit every target, but I think certainly our goal should be to hit every single one of our targets across all areas. Second one around participation in advanced coursework. So currently, our current data, this is the 21, this is actually 21, 22 data, is that we have 67% of our students, for all students, are participating in advanced coursework. We think that that's a number that we really need to get up. We need to get our kids in dual enrollment classes, AB classes. So a 10% increase by looking, enrollment data 25, 26 would signify that we move from about 2 out of every 3 students to about 80%, which means about 4 out of 5 of our students are in advanced coursework. The reason why we also put a larger number for the DESE identified subgroups is you see most of our subgroups, this is all available on the Reading report card online, DESE's report card. You'll see some of our data and subgroups is concerning. I think right now, for example, 27.6% of our students with disabilities are taking advanced coursework. 46.7% of our low-income students. So some of those groups, we know we have a lot of work to do to get some students in those groups up into our advanced coursework. We've talked a lot about that means providing the right supports for them to be able to be successful there too. And then last but not least, we've heard Ms. Callahan talk a lot about innovation pathways, which we currently, the goal is to have it for each pathway, to be able to have 25 students, so basically have the advanced manufacturing and the information, have 25 in each per year. So that's like this year our goal was to have 50 in the class. We're actually up to 74 already with others trying to get in. So next year we'd like to add another 50, in the following year another 50, which would bring us to about 150. I would like to keep that goal possibly open to shift as the year goes on. If we add a new pathway, I would like that number to go up, obviously, too. But this is just assuming that our current pathway structure stays. 2 data sources I decided not to include on here at this point, too, was one around SEL data. We want to find a way to quantify the work that we're doing around SEL work, except we know that it's just really challenging to find quantifiable Panorama data. You may say, quantifiable SEL data. You may say, how about use Panorama? The challenge with Panorama data, if you talk to them, is that is a snapshot in that moment in time and how the students are feeling. So if there was recently, if you're asking how students feel like they belong in a certain school community, and you ask them at a certain time where it had just followed up a certain incident, that can change the data. It's not necessarily something that you can expect to be a trajectory or something that's continual growth. Instead, they say you should be using that as just like a health check of where your district, of where your school is, and then be able to intervene accordingly. So we are still looking for just like the best data that we can use, but I think at this point, Panorama doesn't provide us something that we're comfortable using as like district targets. Similarly, you may ask about just more interim assessment data, so we're relying heavily on both iReady data at the middle school level, IRLA data at the elementary level, and also Math Common Assessment data at the elementary school level. We think that those data sources should be strongly correlated with what's going to happen on MCAS. So I just think I don't want to get too far into the weeds on these goals around IRLA, iReady at this point, knowing that should be reflected in MCAS. I am open to the idea of in year 25, 24, 25, since we don't have MCAS data, of bringing some data in those sources if the committee finds that would be helpful. That's goal 1. That's probably the one I have to speak the most about because I just think there's some more context I want to provide. Goal 2 shouldn't be something that's a surprise to the committee. I just want to flag one thing here. The committee has asked for just urgency around the goal. I hear that reflected from all of our stakeholder groups. You should see benchmark 1 on the bottom of that goal is that we're going to present the Math Pathways Committee recommendation and District Pathway Implementation Plan and School Committee during the November 30th, 2023 meeting. So that work should be happening, pretty quickly over the next couple of months. Moving forward, goal 3, we feel like as a district, we use district in pockets, but we don't feel like that district using data is really at the core of our improvement work in the way that it needs to be. And therefore, I don't think it's necessarily driving all of our decisions around action planning, intervention, support. So you'll see the action steps that we list out in this strategy are, first of all, creating a central location for storing key student level data that can easily flow in from a variety of sources. Right now, we feel like we have a lot of data, but we don't really have it all organized and stored in one place that's easily accessible for all of our leaders. That would enable us to do the type of analysis and action plan that we would need to do. And as you go through those key actions, you'll see that our plan is trying to support our district and our school level teams to be constantly analyzing data and action planning off of the trends that we're seeing in the data. You'll see key action number 5 also pushes us to start to think about how do we capture some of the promising practices that we're seeing as a way to kind of institutionalize some of that for years to come as well. Goal 4 is something that we've had over the past couple of years. I just want to flag the way that we plan to move this goal forward. I've spoke a lot about this in the past, or on action steps 3, 4, 5. One, you'll see reflected in action step 3 is around this connection to data work being at the core of our strategy to support our growth of our principals. And you'll also see step 4, district data team meetings, and 5, constantly monitoring our progress towards these goals. So I think just wanted to flag, this is kind of the next step for us as a district leadership team to support, coach, and develop our principals, to really invest in them to be able to use data effectively to make decisions at the school and classroom level and student level. Last but not least, this is my last year of the new superintendent induction program, and we'll graduate in the spring, so just have that as a aligned with professional practice goal. But I'll pause there for any questions, concerns, feedback, ideas, and then I'll incorporate that for the next round.
Sean?
A comment and then 2 thoughts, maybe. So the comment, one is, I really appreciate the first 2 goals in particular, how quantifiable and specific and actionable they are. I think, I mentioned that to you earlier, but I just wanted to say that publicly as well. The logic to not include IRLA and iReady and so forth as interim assessments makes sense to me. I wonder if we might think about, though, whether, we've got a few pockets where we've got a lot of work to do in the MCAS space. I wonder if we think about targeting a few pockets with the interim data in the first year. I don't know that I agree with what I'm saying right now. I'm just thinking out loud, to be honest. But it was a thought that there's maybe a middle ground where we don't exhaust ourselves applying all the different, assessments we could use against all the different populations, but think about a few pockets where we really want to be focused and we know we're going to have work to do on those MCAS targets. So that was the first thought. And then the second one was, in the coaching, developing, and supporting principals, be forcing, shoehorning it in a little bit here, but we talked, I don't remember when it was, maybe it was during the budget process, but we talked about how do we make sure that the assistant principals at the elementary school level are, reflected in that same sort of body of strategy work, or body of work. I wonder if we just think about maybe, adding a key action that gets at ensuring that we're also focused on the development of the assistant principals.
Love that, and that's been on our mind. We've been moving that forward, so I think that should be reflected. Good feedback.
Sarah?
I was piggyback to, I had a similar line of thinking to Sean around pocketed, targeted kind of, special populations, areas where we're not currently using data to drive decision-making towards our goals. What are those things? So for example, I'm making this up, if it's, looking at the early, kindergarten, pre-K screening data, and are we referring people, what are those, then what is the IRLA data showing? Are we referring them for tier 2 intervention, those kinds of things?
So I like this, and if the committee's comfortable with it, we're starting to get MCAS data that's starting to become more available, yet it's we don't have any comparables with like local communities, so still just kind of data in a vacuum. I would love to look at some of the trends for this year, identify maybe a spot that is of concern, whether it's, well, actually your example won't work for MCAS, but if it's, third grade reading, or if it's, math achievement for 6th grade high need students, or something that may be a little bit more targeted. The date, when the MCAS data comes out, it might help pinpoint that for us, but I'll look outside of MCAS too, just in case there's trends at the younger levels too. It's good feedback. Thank you.
The only thing I'll add to that is make sure you look at it from a cohort perspective if you're doing that, right?
Yep.
So they're 3rd grade now, they'll be 5th grade by
Yep.
the time this data set is over.
Yep.
4th grade of data, and 5th grade with IRLA or something else showing continued improvement.
For students, correct, and unless you back it up to say we want to work with our teachers at that particular grade level, and we think it's like a professional development piece too, then there may be a couple of layers to it.
Yep.
Thank you. I think that's good feedback. I might make that pretty specific, if that's okay, for at least for the upcoming year.
We like specificity.
Okay.
Any other feedback, thoughts? Erin and I think have had our say, so.
You've had your say.
Okay, great. I think this is a great start. I mean, I'll echo Sean's first thought is that the measurability of it is pretty straightforward, so it's going to make it both challenging, but also easy to measure. I think the only other thing as a committee, we'll have to kind of calibrate on is, okay, he says 10%. if he gets 8%, does that mean he didn't meet the goal, or is he partially meet? Maybe we should think about that at some point in time in the future. We don't do that now, but just something to think about because of the specificity. How do we want to think about that from a rating scale? So we're not all over the board, which oftentimes we are. So just something to mull on as we go through that process, so. Okay, anything else on this? Nope. Okay, so then I will turn the mic over to Sarah and Sean for our last topic, which is the conversation around meeting management.
Me to start?
Sure.
Okay.
It's not lost on me, the irony of doing this on what will be one of our shortest meetings of the year.
That's why I just.
Nor is it lost on me that Tom
Oh, we
seems to
could
be
talk about this for
proactively
3
implementing some of the things we're about to say, but we'll get there anyway. I'll caveat that we were having this discussion when I was chair. This isn't a Tom reaction, so for anybody watching at home, I want that to be clear. So no particular organization here, but just some of the ideas that we generated that, you know, maybe worth considering for improving the efficiency of our meetings. So one is moving most of our reports, certainly liaison reports, but potentially staff reports as well, to written or at least a portion of staff reports to written pre-reads that we include as part of the packet. You know, I think clearly liaison reports could function that way, maybe with the opportunity if there's anything you really need to call awareness to, make sure people are aware of, you know, we'll open that opportunity. I think we could do something similar with staff reports where, you know, there's detail in the packet and maybe a consolidated report that is presented on a rotating basis or something along those lines for the top things that we want to get out on the table. Relatively hard caps on the length of the discussion on any particular item. You know, with a willingness to table a topic to a future meeting if the discussion's dragging on or we're just not getting there, or we're starting to see ourselves stray from the core topic. Relatedly, and we did this 2 meetings ago when we were doing the stabilization fund policy. When we get tripped up on something, let's call the moment, identify or assign members to work through some of the details, you know, with a fresh set of eyes, and come back with something for the next meeting is certainly an effective strategy as well. Prioritizing the agenda items in the order of importance so that we can, you know, always have that opportunity to parking lot things that don't fit and don't feel like we have to keep plowing along when we're all losing steam and losing effectiveness. And then there's a tranche of ideas here around really establishing ground rules for presenters in particular. So one would be establishing a clear objective for the presentation, right? So sometimes I think folks come in and it's a bit aimless and it's not sort of clear what we're trying to achieve, and it's, you know, generally an update, but they're also looking for us to weigh in on things, or maybe there's an action they're hoping that we're going to take. You know, ensuring that the objective of the presentation is very clear, I think is important. We could be a little bit, you know, collectively, again, this was certainly true when I was chair as well. We could be a little bit more stringent on folks in terms of setting a deadline that we need the presentation complete and submitted so it can be included in the packet and can be presented in a more expedient way. That might potentially allow us to limit most presentations to something like 15 minutes, like, you know, like we saw this evening. Another thought in that same vein is, I think it was Ted Turner used to run his companies with one-page memos. And essentially it was, you know, all we're going to discuss in the meeting is the one-page memo. If there's something you need folks to read beforehand, you got to get it to them beforehand and they need to have the opportunity. And that memo would be somewhat templatized. What do you need me to know? What is the action you're looking for? You know, period, right? We don't have to be quite that rigid, quite that structured, but I think there's probably an opportunity for us to think about how do we help our presenters, many of whom just are, you know, doing it without a ton of guidance for how to sort of, you know, effectively get what they're trying to get from us. How do we help them do that effectively, as well as kind of limiting the scope of the time there? Sarah had suggested, you know, do we have a timekeeper or facilitator role? Could be the chair, or it could be an appointee who just, you know, kind of brings the hammer down as necessary. Not the real hammer, and then the last one was, and we've done, you know, we've certainly done this with the policy subcommittee, but, you know, a lot of other neighboring towns, and we talked about this when we were talking about Reading and Reading, a lot of other towns use have many more subcommittees to do a lot of the work in between meetings on schedules that, are more flexible for the members who are participating in those and so forth, and allow the whole body meetings, the full body meetings to be more efficient that way. So those were some of the thoughts. I don't know, did I miss anything? Any other?
No, I think the memo outlined it well. I think we just want to make sure we're using everybody's time wisely. And I think tonight there was a good example of, the MBTA presentation was some presentation and some good conversation and questions. And I think we've often, particularly for some presenters when it's tended to kind of meander a little bit, we don't leave enough time for questions and discussion. I think that's really the meat of what I would like to get out of these meetings personally. So I think, and part of that is on us to give, specific guidance around this is what we're hoping to hear from you more specifically. And if there's additional information put in the packet, would love, I read it in a couple different settings usually, so.
Any thoughts, feedback, Carla, Aaron, in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes feel badly because if a presentation has gone longer, I'm like, I want to give feedback, or I might even have a question, but I'm like, oh, we still have so much more on our agenda. I'm going to keep my mouth shut right now. So, and I think, some people only get up before us once a year. They might be really excited to have that exchange with us, or at the very least get some affirmation from us. And I love the idea of giving more guidance and around time and around focus to our presenters. I'm less a fan of forming more subcommittees unless we really think they're necessary. But I think a lot of this would be really easy to implement, and I think you already have been trying to implement a lot of it, and we've seen a difference.
Carla?
I think I like your idea about the template of, it's just more of a focusing people, right, for presentations, is this is what we're looking for, or what are your objectives, what do you need from us, so we come into it prepared as well. It was kind of like with this presentation tonight, right, they may have walked away with some more information, but they still have a lot of information they need from us. So I feel like part of it, like we still have stuff to do. We're not maybe even sure or clear what, it seems like there needs to be other meetings with that particular group.
There's
I
more
think
partnership coming with them, Carla.
What was that?
There's more partnership coming with them.
Exactly. I think I think just the focus is always good to make us more efficient. I will sign up to be the parliamentarian if you would like somebody to. I did that in college. It was a blast.
So a couple of practicality things, just to make sure we're on the same page. Everybody's got a liaison role, or many, so if that's the case, you need to basically have your liaison report done Monday night at the latest, and preferably Sunday night, so we can have it start to be included as we go through the packets for Monday. That's for Thursday meetings. Now, we have an upcoming Monday meeting, which means you probably need to have it ready Wednesday night, right? So just think about the practicalities of that. I think it's perfectly reasonable, and yes, can there be exceptions? Absolutely. Sometimes a meeting happens the day before, and you should give us the information in case it's something critical. I would say as well, let's make sure that the report is what's relevant for the schools.
Right.
Right? That's what we're here for. We're not just, talking about everything under the sky, right? What is relevant for us to know from a leadership perspective of the schools? So, if there's nothing that's relevant to us, just say they had a meeting, nothing came of it from our perspective. Or, put this on your radar because it's coming in 6 months. That's fine, right? But let's think of it that way. I applaud the intent of making sure that we have a chance to do the Q&A and really kind of dive in where we feel like we want to dive in. Because I share, although I'm less shy about it, I share the concern about not wanting to ask questions sometimes because we run out of time. So I think Dr. Milczewski, you and the staff have kind of already talked through some of these things already as well, and are working through some of that on your side. So sounds like we're all mostly in agreement. The one thing I want to say as well is I don't want to not highlight the positive in this meeting. So I don't want the positive to be buried in the packet. So if there's something we really want to celebrate and bring out, I want to make sure that comes out in this meeting as much as possible as well.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. Well, I mean, I think that for some of the presentations, that is the objective of celebrating big success or wins, and not just, what do they need from us, or whatever that is. And I think, we can help guide people there. It won't be,
Sometimes all they need from us is our knowledge and understanding,
absolutely.
right? That could be simple as that. Carla, you were going to say something? I'll come back.
I
over
would, the one thing that I would, that I'm not in favor of is the, having the liaison reports written up and submitted. I think our liaison reports, we're done in 5 minutes, for the most part, right? It's not a long process, and I think it's good sometimes to get the back and forth. That's just my take on it. I don't think that's a huge time suck, our liaison reports.
In general, it's not. There have been times that I've been guilty, and I think a couple other members have been guilty, where they just kind of rattle on about something that really isn't relevant to us. So we just have to work through that together.
Yeah, and applying the same rule of like, what is the objective? Is it school-related, give an update, or not, pass the baton?
Erin, you were going to say something else?
Yeah, having the presentations in the packet so that we can preview them is really helpful to me. It makes a huge difference if I've been able to look at it ahead of time. I can come here knowing what some of my questions and comments might be. Sometimes we get them minutes before, sometimes not at all before. And I just think that is not the, doesn't put us in the best position to, really engage. So I would like to ask that we ask that of presenters. It might not be possible 100% of the time, but I think if we set that expectation, then
Agreed.
I think it's fair.
And depending on what the topic is for the presentation, I mean, in my private life, work life, it just gets bumped to the next meeting if we weren't prepared until minutes before. If it's not something that's super time sensitive, just bump it to the next meeting.
As long as we can do that. We don't want to end up where last year where we had 2 meetings of marathons because they got bumped to the next meeting and bumped to the next meeting. So we got to be careful about that too and make sure they're timely. So it's a balance, right? It just happens. And through no fault of anybody's, it just happens. So we have to be careful about it.
Can I ask you a question?
Just one other thing. I think beyond our meeting efficiency, the other thing about timeliness of getting presentations in is, we've both been through this. It's got to be hell on Olivia, the week of a meeting, the constant iterations and constant turns. It'd be really nice to be able to do one version on Monday that is pretty darn close, and, if a field trip permission has to sneak in or whatever, that's fine, but, we create a lot of churn by having to constantly update the packet because we're trying to get things out as they come in, and I think we can do better there.
Erin?
I hear that, but I also don't want us to not put the packet out because we're waiting on one presentation, because we've also done that, and then the packet has gone out, borderline late.
Yeah, and
So I totally want to be protective of her time as well, but
That would be
I
the
also
point of
don't want to
having a
hold.
relatively hard deadline, right?
Yeah.
Because the consideration you have to make when you're waiting for a presentation is it better to get the rest, other things in the packet out now, knowing that people may not notice that I posted an update and never see that, or is it better to wait because we're expecting the presentation later today or first thing tomorrow? There's never a good answer there, so to the degree that we can say, we're going to have a pretty hard cutoff here, that, by Monday at noon, anything that's going to go in the packet is ready to go, I think it would help everybody.
Tom, what are your thoughts on, having the leadership of your team writing up summaries or something for the packet each week? Is that something you've discussed? Are they on board with that? Or is that something they would prefer to just continue to do a brief synopsis here?
Yeah, so I think we've talked about almost everything that's been discussed here. I think we agree with the spirit of it, and certainly so much of this falls on us and our team too, so I think you should see improvement on us in sort of the areas that you're also seeking as a committee to be more efficient. I think that's the one area that I struggle with a little bit, is just asking for a written update on something. If it's relevant for that particular meeting, I can see us getting that in the packet for information, but I just think, I know we've kind of just used reports as just a general shout out or highlight or appreciation and tried to keep them really brief. So I think it sounds like the committee still appreciates that. I'll just kind of make sure that everyone knows that that's our goal, is celebrations, recognitions, appreciations, very brief. If there's something that you feel like that could be a longer update, we can try to get that in advance too. We also do try to get a lot of the things that are updates and information in on Fridays too. So I don't think putting reports for us will be kind of a constant practice. That's fair.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to ask that of them, actually. And I like those snippets and reports. I think that, just the little highlights, I think it's important for anyone tuning in, whether they're tuning in live or tuning in later, which is the case for most people, I think. I think it's nice for them to hear when other administrators are able to come, so.
Yeah, I'll say, it wasn't that long ago that, probably 5 members of the administration would be here at I mean, it was long ago in the sense that it was before you got
Yes.
here, but we'd have, the superintendent, both assistant superintendents, director of finance, who am I missing? Probably somebody else. Yeah, probably somebody else, all here, all giving relatively lengthy reports. I think the model that, you and the team have adopted works really well. To the degree that we would think about written reports, I would think it would be, if people want to put more, if people want to get more in, we should think about that as an opportunity. But the approach you've taken of, you and most nights, maybe one member of the admin team, being here and sharing a bit of a consolidated report that reflects some for the other folks as well, has worked really well. I think it's, an opportunity to celebrate more or highlight more great things that are going on if there's need for that, is what the written report would look like. But again, it wouldn't be required for, by any means. So
I'm hearing then, we're going to take written reports off the table for both the administration and probably the liaisons. There's not a consensus there. But we'll make sure that in their case, it's the celebratory related things, which they always are anyway. And in our case, it's what's in it for me, for lack of a better way to say it, for the school committee. What does it mean for the school committee and the schools? That's what your liaison report should focus on and summarize.
Yep. There should be no shame in I have no report comment on a given night,
Okay?
unless you're on the school building committee. Just kidding.
Well, we probably need a joint meeting with them at some point in time soon anyway, so. Okay, anything else?
Speaking of reports, we didn't do reports tonight.
I skipped past them. Do you want to do reports? Let's go back to it. You got anything to report?
No report.
Carla?
If you want a building committee report.
Sure.
The ad for request for services for the designer will hit the central register next Wednesday. So we're on schedule. We're on the fast track schedule.
Okay, great. Sean, no report?
No report.
No report?
No report.
Briefly, just like to thank the staff, students, families for a smooth first week to school despite the heat, which has been really difficult. Just like to thank everyone for all of your work in helping to launch the year in we think a very successful way. So thank you.
I guess I have one thing, just as a reminder for the community. Assuming the weather holds for the town fair over the weekend, Dunk the Reddings is back again. Many school members are going to be part of that, and a few of the select board are going to be part of that as well, so.
And you.
Well, you, me, I said many,
Yeah.
so 12 to 5, there's going to be a lot of us. I have to follow you somehow, so I'm in trouble, but we'll see what happens.
Bring it on. Should be fun.
I'll help you raise some money, Tom, don't worry.
I'll be there and I'll come early and heckle you, that's what I'll do.
Bring it on. You did last year. Bring it on.
All right, one last motion,
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
seconded by Sean. All in favor? All opposed? And we are adjourned at 8:23.